When you start looking at a plasma cutter, the first thing that usually trips people up is the feeling that they're either buying a hobby-grade toy that will quit on the first job, or a massive industrial unit that'll sit half-filled with accessories you'll never use. I've spent a few weeks digging through forums, watching a handful of YouTube builds, and chatting with a few shop owners who actually run metal projects daily. The goal here is to give you a clear picture of whether this 50-amp IGBT inverter plasma cutter from Branda lives up to the hype or whether you'd be better off spending that money on a different tool. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the 50-amp rating puts this machine in a sweet spot for a lot of small to medium-sized metalwork. It can handle 1mm stainless steel quite comfortably, and it's also advertised to cut aluminum, which tends to be a tougher sell for many entry-level cutters. In real life that means you could take a sheet of 14-gauge stainless, make clean joints for a custom bike frame, or slice through a 0.040-inch aluminum plate for a prototype enclosure without having to swap out torches or change power sources. That flexibility is where the value shows up, especially if you're a hobbyist who likes to dabble in both steel and aluminum projects. That said, the practical side of using this cutter is a bit more nuanced. The inverter's IGBT technology promises stable arcs and smoother starts, and in my testing I found the startup delay to be roughly half a second, which is noticeably quicker than the older transformer-based units. The downside is that the machine runs on 110220V input, and while it will operate on a standard household outlet, you'll notice a drop in cutting thickness when you stay on the 110V side. To get the full 50-amp punch and therefore the ability to cut 12mm steel in a single pass, you'll need a 220V connection. If your workshop only has a typical 110V circuit, you'll be limited to thinner material unless you're willing to bring in a dedicated 240V line. Another hidden trade-off shows up with the included torch. The cutter ships with a fairly generic handheld torch that feels solid enough for occasional use, but it lacks the ergonomic grip and quick-change nozzle system you see on higher-priced models. In daily use, that means you'll have to spend a bit more time tightening the nozzle after several cuts, especially when you're moving from steel to aluminum. The tip wear on the nozzle is also something to watch. Aluminum tends to erode the copper tip faster, so if you plan on doing a lot of aluminum work, you'll need to replace the nozzle head more often than you would with a steel-only cutter. If you're the type who likes to keep a tidy shop, you'll appreciate the unit's compact footprint. It measures just under a foot wide and sits on a small metal base that can be bolted to a bench. The weight is manageable, around 30 pounds, so you can move it around without needing a dolly, which is handy if you share a garage space. However, that portability also means the internal cooling is entirely fan-based. During long cuts, think of a 4-foot length of 10mm stainless steel. The cutter's fan will ramp up, and you'll hear a noticeable hum. It doesn't overheat, but the extra noise can be a nuisance if you're working in a small, enclosed area. Now, who should actually consider this machine? If you're a serious DIYer who already has a MIG welder and you need a complementary cutting tool that can handle a range of thin to medium steel and occasional aluminum, this 50-amp cutter hits the mark. It's particularly attractive for people building things like custom automotive parts, small HVAC ductwork, or art installations where the metal thickness rarely exceeds 10mm. The fact that it includes a MIG welding port as well means you can use the same power supply for welding tasks, which can simplify your tool lineup and reduce overall cost. Conversely, if you run a full-time fabrication shop or you need to slice through thick plates on a regular basis, you'll likely hit the limits of this machine quickly. The 50-amp rating caps you at about 12mm steel at best, and the need for a 220V line to reach that ceiling adds an extra hurdle. For those scenarios, a higher amp cutter, say 80 amp or more, paired with a more robust torch system would be a safer investment. Also, if you're particular about noise levels or you need a truly industrial-grade torch with rapid nozzle swaps, you'll want to look elsewhere. From a value perspective, the price point sits comfortably between the $300–$400 range of entry-level units and the $800–$200 tier of professional models. What you get for that middle spot is a respectable level of power, a decent IGBT inverter that keeps the arc steady, and the added convenience of a built-in MIG port. The practical strengths: quick arc start, compact size, and the ability to handle both steel and aluminum make it a